Okay, well, welcome to Rock Against Racism Vermont, another broadcast. Tonight I'm here sitting with Jeremy Kirk from the Congregational Church in Dover, pastor, and our good friend and collaborator Kate. And Jeremy's going to play some music and talk about some of the things that are important to him. From the music point of view and politics, and we'll see where it spins out to. So I'll just hand it over to you guys.
Well, thanks, John. This is just so wonderful to be a part of this, and that an idea has so quickly expanded into action. And in our area, it's so important. I was just telling Kate before we started that I have experience in organizing social justice, organizing in big cities, but the small town, that's where the rubber hits the road. And whether it's this action or our pride flag got vandalized a couple of years ago, and how we responded and how the community tried to respond to that, it's very, very important. Vermont has this reputation as this liberal place, whatever that means, but people tend to think things can't happen here. And I have a lot of thoughts on not only do things happen here, as we've known recently with certain vandalism and expressions of hate, but also I think that in general that kind of naive liberal pride is a lot of times stopping any sort of substantive action. So that's what I notice. And I've loved our conversations in the past and hearing about your organizing history. And when you told me the way I had remembered it was three of the most influential albums in your life. And I probably spent more time thinking about it than I did on my last couple sermons, because I thought the second you limit it, I'm like, oh my gosh. So I don't know if these are the three, but these three work.
Don't blame me.
No. It's
blame the BBC. That's where I got the idea from. They had a radio show where Iggy Pop or whoever would come on and play 10 songs that he couldn't live without if it was marooned on a desert island.
Right.
So, and it's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to narrow down.
Yeah.
Lord knows I could spend a month of Sundays thinking about what few songs I find.
And it's so interesting to go back through the music that was so influential, and now being middle aged and thinking like, well, what's still important and what's not. And I like that. I told you that a friend and I are working on a podcast called Punk After 30, and I wanted to interview you for that at some point, but the whole idea is like so much more interesting about punk identity when it's actually hard to when you actually rely on a society that's around you to get money and get support. And so I'm very interested in what people are doing after they're 30, not just what we're all doing when we're young and drunk, and where we're rewarded for our rebellion constantly. So do I just?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the little snippets I've heard so far.
So I picked through this 4 on here, and I'm going to try to keep it to 3 unless I just absolutely can't. But the first, so I thought of it as albums, and so I'm going to play a snippet of a song just to represent the album. But it was so difficult, and I will try to not give too much explanation. Think of all the things that have been left off. I'm like, oh, I'm going to see John. It's got to be Subhumans, Citizen Fish. I've got to go to, I've got, obviously the Clash, but can't do the Clash because everybody would do the Clash. So I'm like, I wonder if John knows, Subhumans. So this first one is the band. I'm from Boise, Idaho, and this band is called Built to Spill. And Built to Spill, I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and the reason why I'm putting this on here is because if you grow up in Boise, Idaho, and you're interested in art, and you're interested in progressive politics at all, you're always just trying to get old enough to move to Portland or Seattle. And I graduated from high school in 1996. We got to get out, and this is the time when kind of post-punk, termed grunge stuff was going on. And now looking back on it, Boise had this magical thing happen. Now looking back on it, our isolation from those cultural centers produced some of the coolest post-punk work, music. And so now looking back, I'm like, wow, I was so lucky standing outside of this band's shows before I was old enough to get in to listen to them. Built to Spill is the band that followed a punk band called Tree People, and the main songwriter in Built to Spill, or the songwriter, his name is Doug Marsh, and he lives in the neighborhood where my parents live. But without going into it too much, I just thought, like, well, what are albums where when you heard it, there was a before and an after? And so for me, when I heard this album, which is There's Nothing Wrong with Love by Built to Spill, when I was in high school, early high school, I was just never the same. And still to this day, I play it once a month at least. I'm putting this on. There's 2 songs on this album that I sing to my kids when they were toddlers. My daughters now, one of my daughters is older, and the other one is still a toddler. And then my son, he heard it a little less, but I would sing 2 of these songs, including this one, as lullabies to them. And so it very much links me back, even though it's a very famous band now, really connects me with Boise in that time.
So did you find out about them and hear this album when they were in Boise in like a small band? Like were you into the beginning? Were you sort of into them before anyone else? You know?
Yeah, I remember this guy named Ben Klein, who was a year older than me, had his guitar in the theater. We were in theater together, and he pulled it out and started playing these chords. And I remember that was the first moment I ever heard Built to Spill. And this was the album that came out that week that he said, oh, there's a new album out, and well, whatever, his local band, right? And Built to Spill, in short, is basically like if you take Neil Young, David Bowie, these are like main influences, and then a bunch of punk, and that's kind of what you get. So this song is called Car by Built to Spill, and it's early Built to Spill, and is definitely the one a lot of people from that time would know. So back when radio used to have actual DJs, you might have Nirvana's coming on for the first time, and then you have these other like Seattle era songs, but then you would also have someone playing this. And this is from Up Records, which is in Seattle, and this is just the Built to Spill had just moved to Seattle, but he was always still in Boise. And so this is Car by Built to Spill, and I'll just play a little bit, and you can tell me when.
You get the car, I'll get the night off. You'll get the chance to take the world apart and figure out how it works. Don't let me know what you find out. I need a car, you need a guide, who needs a map. If I don't die or worse, I'm gonna need a nap. Best I'll be asleep when you get back. I wanna see it when you find out what comet stars and moons are all about. Wanna see their faces turn to backs of heads and slowly get smaller. Wanna see it now. Wanna see it now.
So that's just like a little taste of it, but in the moment that was really this like thing that I think was kind of a precursor to what would later be labeled emo. It's just like, it just doesn't make any sense now outside of the context that this kind of like childlike wondering that he has in these lyrics and things, I never heard anything like that, unless you really can hear like the David Bowie that's in his stuff and everything. And you know, it's like if a punk rock band also is a jam band, that's what Built to Spill becomes. And they have a lot of weird crossover punk Grateful Dead fans. like you'll see like hippies and punks at the same place, which is kind of so that's Built to Spill from Boise, Idaho, which is also where I'm from.
So are they you said that they've evolved a lot. They kept going for a while. I feel like they're one of the indie veteran kind of bands.
Yeah, and he still tours. So originally the concept of Built to Spill was to change up the rest of the band other than him every album, but then he fell in, he was playing with friends, but now he is doing that. So
Okay.
So it's him and so most people who play with him are young. But several albums in the middle, he had his core people. So, and but yeah, before and after I heard Built to Spill, and then I was living in France, and I walked into their the Virgin mega store in downtown Paris. And there was this huge display that said the chef d'oeuvre de rock américain, the masterpiece of American rock, Built to Spill. And I was like, what the hell's going on? Like, they're from Boise, and a lot of that stuff, Cat Power, a lot of that Seattle post-punk stuff that I don't know how to categorize now, other than pre-emo stuff. A lot of that was really Pavement. Pavement was huge, and Steve Malkmus was huge in France, and so. So that's that one.
One of the things that I like about doing these things is that I hear about bands that I would never otherwise have heard of. Mickey came up with a whole, Mickey over at The Void came up with a whole bunch of bands I've never heard of.
Oh yeah, no, I actually I went home and listened to one of the albums that I hadn't heard that he recommended. I was actually liked it quite a bit. So
yeah,
and he's almost exclusively hardcore. So
yeah,
with a Motown frisbee thrown across the course.
Yeah, that's just I think it's so cool. I will totally, if anybody spends enough time to say these are the 3 albums or the 3 songs,
right.
I mean, it's gonna go good. So the second one that I had is around from the same time, and again, before and after. My aunt is exactly halfway in between my father and me. So my aunt's the one that got me into punk rock and all the good music I got into. And so she sent me this album, and this is from Merge Records, and this is the Spinanes. And later this woman would be known as, or she put out albums just under her name, which is Rebecca Gates. And Chris Backridge has had a relationship, some sort of musical relationship with Rebecca Gates. Something about Mass Mocha or Bennington College, I can't remember.
Right.
But Chris has done so much, and so I shouldn't be surprised anymore when I mention the Spinanes and Chris Backridge says, oh yeah, Rebecca and all that stuff. But there's just something about the sound here that represents just a whole bunch of music from that time. The sound, the feel, and I won't go into describing it all, but that's it. And also I wanted to make sure that there's roots of a lot of different women post-punk from the Northwest going on in this too. But
when did this come out?
This is 1994, I think.
Okay.
This is the 1993, and this is just the reissue that just came out. And so Spinanes is well known to some folks, and then I think their other albums were Sub Pop.
Oh, okay.
So Seattle. And this one should work.
Still sealed.
Well, I just bought that for a friend. I just happened
Oh,
to
yeah?
have it. My record collection is long since I sold it before I moved across the country, but which is, I know. What would I do? A third of it was Sonic Youth and spin-off stuff. How can I live without that now? So,
You may not have heard the 4 digital bonus tracks though.
no, I haven't. You're right. When I give that to my friend, I'll have to borrow it right away. That's how it works.
There's generations of people that gave up their vinyl only to, like me.
I never had it. I never. I was never, I guess, permanently. I didn't have I moved every year for decades, And
Yeah,
I just
of course,
carried
yeah.
it with me. First I had CDs and then I put those all in like a book, and I threw away all the cases just because I couldn't
Yeah.
carry the shelves and the CDs and, every single year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a loss. All those albums. So this is Spitfire by the Spinanes, also known as Rebecca Gates, and their lineup was interesting because it's just her and a drummer. And I'm sorry I don't remember his name right now, but this is from 1993.
It's all fine. My sides are green. When that's the where she crashes.
So that's the Spinanes from Portland, Oregon.
Has she she's obviously worked on, it sounds like, a lot of other projects, but has she kept this sort of idea going of just her and the drummer? Is that something that she's kept doing, or she just expanded in all
Yeah,
directions?
I think it became like really interesting solo singer-songwriter, more folky poppy
Okay.
stuff, and that's under her name Rebecca Gates. But
Okay.
it's more interesting. Like I want to say it's like definitely like I'm thinking of other things that were going on at the time. Like I think Lilith Fair is something interesting, and I have no idea what she would think of this, but I could see her like maybe going more in that kind of a direction.
Kristen
and-
Hirsch from Throwing Muses
Yeah.
did the similar thing. She had a very
Exactly.
good solo album.
Yes.
Exactly what I was thinking.
And I would almost said it's like if Christian Hirsch was a little punk. I almost thought of that. So we're on the same. I don't know what Rebecca would think of that, but I think the only network TV performance was they were on the early Conan O'Brien show, and this woman gets up there and like that's really like a snapshot in history because it's like Sub Pop is now promoting the album, and she gets up there in her like thrift store skirt and just with this drummer, and she just leans into the guitar and rocks back and forth, and it's just so much more interesting than so many of the other bands of the era
Yeah.
that like we think of that time. And they're all great, right? But like so much more interesting than other things that we think of as the very like male dominated grunge thing of Seattle. And Rebecca, and there's other things that sound different, but Spitfire is definitely my favorite song. So, and yeah, she still does cool stuff. So I hope that, I think she's out west, but if she was doing something again like at Mass Mocha or wherever Chris had encountered her, I would be there for
I
sure.
think you're doing a big West Coast representation here, because I don't know if people have chosen a lot of West Coast specific artists. I wasn't there for your conversation with John and Susan, but
Oh yeah, well, with hardcore probably not, right?
yeah, and he was specifically because it was a couple bands that he had run into personally too.
Yeah.
So it was like
Yeah.
New York, specifically New York hardcore
Yeah,
scene,
yeah.
and yeah.
Oh man, and I love that. I mean, I love so much of that, but like punk, we haven't really listened. This is all like punk, post-punk stuff, but like the punk on the West Coast, late '80s, I guess, it's really poppy. So like, Bad Religion. It's hard to not put Bad Religion on here, which
Yeah.
is a huge influence, even though they and I come to different conclusions about religion. I agree with all their critiques about the religion that they critique. But it was very hard. But like Bad Religion is like almost every song could be an Irish drinking song or a pop song if it was just sung by someone else. It's so catchy. Then the East Coast punk hardcore was very different, and so that's. There it is. So okay. So then I was thinking like albums where there was a before I heard it and an after I heard it, and so I got punk rock is a big part of my identity, but I got into it much later than most other people, and I graduated from college, and I'd been in a ska band, an American second wave ska band, which is something I really need to atone for, considering all of the racist appropriations of island and British black art from the generation before. But I was in this during the ska revival, and we were on this tour called the Work Tour, which is like this thing that is problematic. And at the time, it was like a tour of like California like pop punk bands and a lot of things, But I got to meet a lot of really cool people, and it was a great experience to be able to play in front of large groups. But why on earth am I talking about? Oh, because then I was rescued from what was like really cool punk aesthetics into really challenging music that was challenging to me in every way. And the number one band, of course, even though I got into it much later than most people, was when I was 21. or 20 years old, I just became obsessed with the band Fugazi from Washington, D.C. And if you want to know what Fugazi is about, I would just say like whether you don't even have to like the music, is watch the documentary called Instrument by Fugazi. This is their friend that toured with them for like 20 years. He's been filming their shows, and you get to see it all. You get to see, all sorts of different things that he's picked from. And I think that this is an interesting thing with like, I think that what people are looking for when they go to church, the way I would describe it, I'm a pastor of a progressive Christian church, but what they're looking for and what people look for at some punk shows, definitely at Fugazi shows, is some sort of, my words would be transcendence, and Ian Mackay from Fugazi I'm sure wouldn't like that. I've spoken with him. I know that he wouldn't like that language. I'm not trying to put my language on him, but my experience of what I look for through ecstatic religious experience or through the effort to seek some ultimacy beyond just what's right here and apparent is similar to what happens at Fugazi shows, at least ideally. And so I would like to think, and that's why, my favorite collaborators and friends, artistic collaborators or co-conspirators, my idea is not that they must also be religious. It's that they must have this like obsessive hope beyond history sort of thing. So anyhow, Fugazi for me is kind of just the highest bar. Not sonically, not necessarily like, oh, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, but just that how real it is, and how they have expressed their politics, which are very much part of the music, more through what they do as a band rather than just what they say they do by writing. And so if you've always been interested in what's Fugazi is about, I'd say watch the documentary Instrument. This is just a song from the album 13 Songs on Discord Records, which is also the record label that they started. Ian Mackay started with friends in order to not participate in the record industry. They said, we'll just start our own. So now DIY is like a hardware term, right? Do it yourself, right? But like the DIY music, it was whether Fugazi or bands like Bikini Kill out in Olympia, it was like just this idea of, oh, well, we'll just make it ourselves, and we don't need that. And then it becomes really interesting in a new way.
I think that's like you just said something hope beyond history, and it's for me that one sentence summarizes so much of the complexity. And you talking about my generations before and generations after and those to come, it's we can do it. We can do it ourselves, and it's that
Yeah.
spirit that I've always been attracted to. That
Yes.
spirit of you can buy a £1.50 glossy Suffolk programme from the guy in the corner, or you can buy a fanzine for 25p.
Yeah.
It transforms.
Yeah.
It's transformative and it's inclusive, and that's what we at Rock Against Racism
Yeah.
are all about. It's exactly
Absolutely.
what you're talking about, Chris. But I'd love to hear it.
And what's so cool about you doing this project again now at a different time and on a different continent at a different age is that I think that, you know, those moments where we transcend our limitations, where we step out, those things are always they're the second after they're interesting and dangerous, they then become commodified. All right, this is like Horkheimer and Adorno wrote in their essay, The Culture Industry. You know, they're critiquing jazz. They're being hyperbolic, but they're basically like, you all think that jazz is breaking rules. You don't understand that it just does that for this long. And then the economic system learns how to commodify your own resistance to you.
Well, that was the whole, that was like a microcosm of the entire grunge scene,
Yeah,
was this
yeah.
idea that they were rebelling against it, and then it was immediately, you know, that contradiction was just part of the whole tension of it, and was so popular and so corporatized so fast, and then
Yeah.
ended up with Creed in 3 years.
Agreed. Yeah, that's right. Oh god. Oh my god. So this is something else that has tried they've tried consistently to try to step out of those predefined spaces. I think, and this is Fugazi, 13 songs, which is two 7-inch. I think it's two 7 inches put together of their first two, but most people know this as their first album. Unless you were there at the time, most people think of this as the first album, but it's two EPs put together, and oh my goodness, I think it's I think that's 1987. The song is called Promises. It's the last track on the album.
Words and expressions, all these confessions of where we stand. How I see you, and you see me. Dedication, our symmetry together. We will be forever. Common innocent. We've been down where we breathe. Nothing ever had to do. Rearrange and see it through. Stupid fucking words. Taking us in our desires. Free me from this give and take. Free me from this make to make.
So that's it. There were many runners-up, including a local band, but those are the ones.
Well, that's
So thank you for that, and I'm just interested in. There's so many interesting things have happened in Brattleboro with punk music and punk culture, and I'm really interested in how it can intersect with Rock Against Racism. I feel like if a lot of the kids in like the anarcho art scene in Brattleboro of the last like generation and a half, I feel like you could be like their uncle. But in a really real way, these are kids that are all trying to figure out how to do this punk thing. I think for most of my time identifying as like punk and playing in bands and stuff, I was just too drunk to really make anything happen that I thought was important. And I think what's really cool about the punk scene in southern Vermont is that so many of those are They're doing a lot of like radical politics, a lot of radical queer identity projects, and that they're doing things that really make a difference in their art outside of just a scene. And so I feel like, so I just think we're in a really cool space to really see what is the future of punk, which is a big part of my musical identity. So
yeah, I think it's there's certain moments in history that that they describe them as a watershed moment in history, and if ever I've seen one, it's 2020, 21, and I think people look back. I look back with some fondness to the sort of music that I grew up with when I was coming of age. But then it's sort of, some of my favourite bands back then have had the sort of Stairway to Heaven treatment, and I just can't listen to it anymore, But I think that the exciting thing about now is that it's young people that are going to make those changes. It's young people that are talking about, a new wave of feminism in the UK. It's queer politics that are saying, it's not enough. What we've got right now is not enough. And, and the question of race, I mean, good grief, how many centuries have we're under the shadow of, but I think, it always comes back to whoever's at the top of society, whoever's making the rules, what the engine that drives it, I believe, is the engine of people, the mass of people that get active and do creative things.
Well, and especially right now, it feels like 2020 was such a crisis point in so many different ways, and as 2021 has started to get off the ground, it seems obvious that nobody at the top of the heap is going to take advantage of that crisis point in a way to really make, profound change. There's going to be, a slap on the wrist for the crimes that happened, and maybe a few token pieces of legislation, and we're not really going to change the fundamental structures that are the problem unless everybody from the ground up puts pressure on people or gets those people out of office and changes it, through direct action. So that the crisis point, it's almost like after the crisis point passed is when we're realizing that we have to take more action.
Yeah. And I wonder about some hope with affinity between the right and the left. With beforehand, John and I were talking a little bit. I mean, we saw that display of ridiculous display of white supremacy on January 6th at the Capitol building, and also I would say that the disenfranchisement of the working poor and the working class white person, that is, and John's taught me about this history in the UK, but that's the entry point to people actually supporting their own lack of freedoms under an autocratic leader. And so this idea that those folks, that's just an option for frustrated people. Martin Luther King said that a riot is the voice of the voiceless, and of course King was talking about completely other people, and right, but like in this case, I think it's like in some way, I would love to shut up the people that are scaring people with their hateful actions and speech. But the only thing I want more than that, making them shut up, and especially with my vocation as a pastor, is I want to get in their heads. I want to talk with them. I want us to all together reconcile this craziness that we call a society and find places to put our faith other than in particular political leaders or things. And I think that that's what's cool about being in a small town. I love living in New York. I love organizing and in other places or in the country, Portland, Oregon. But here we know each other, and here we can actually do something, and be related to our neighbors in some way where we, for better or for worse, we can't be anonymous.
Yeah, there's something. One of the biggest challenges is that if you're going to get rid of racism, you can't just eliminate every individual racist. You have to change the people's minds. And the only way you change people's minds is not by, unfortunately you can't physically remove them, you have to convince them
And
somehow.
that's the number one ground rule, because, the movement that Rock Against Racism was associated with was based on three very simple principles, three very simple things. Expose their lies about the denial of the Holocaust, and oppose them wherever they organise. build a movement of people that agree with that simple idea that racism is hurtful financially, emotionally, physically, the whole 9 yards. And thirdly, that those people, the skinheads or that particular brand of skinheads that followed the National Front or the British National Party, we said to them, and I said myself and every one of the people that were active in that movement was saying, you're doing the boss's dirty work for them. You thinking that you having a red, white and blue Union Jack flag and a basic minimum wage job, you're going to hang on to that flag and that's going to feed your family. Actually, if you organise, you work with the people around you, then you have a chance of actually changing it and improving everybody's livelihood. And those were the three tenets, and it worked. We recruited from the National Front. After, passionate arguments, sometimes there's a couple of punches thrown, but we did bring people back to the side of people wanting a better life.
And what I like about that also is that you are going in as one of them, or potentially one of them, to talk to them. And I think that can be very instructive when it comes to like now when black and brown people are having so often to educate the people out of their own racism. That's a good model for what white people can be doing right now about racism. Racism is it may be a problem for black and brown people, but racism is a white person's problem.
And it's a lot lower stakes for us to step in.
That's right.
and combat it than for people of color.
That's right. Unless we can build a community mindset where we realize that that our freedom is tied up with other people's freedom. So while I think we should always, those of us who purport as people with skin that looks like mine, we may purport to stand against racism. I think that we ought to call each other to account, and are we ready to put our bodies where our mouths are? Sister Janet Walton from Union Theological Seminary said we were doing civil disobedience, and she called civil disobedience putting your body where your mouth is, and she made another analogy to communion, which is a ritual that Christians practice. That the real communion is putting your body where your mouth is, and I just think that now is a time that we can that we have an opportunity to talk with people in a way that is different than necessarily just waiting for them, waiting for people to get educated by a black or brown person, and taking some of that and saying this is actually our problem, it's our people's problem, and we all get to be a part of so much more if we address it. But it's been around for a long time, so we better get busy. At least in our own little place.
Well, on that note, I'd say I'm in total agreement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Kate.
Kate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Jen, for patiently
Thank you,
filming
Jen.
all this. And thank you to all the people that are supporting Rock Against Racism, the small businesses, the record stores, the skate shops. All of those people are invaluable. They're the people that get the work done.
Like and subscribe, rockagainstracismvt.com.
All right. Fantastic.